that our planet has experienced 5 periods in its past when it was covered in ice and had a severely cold climate. Such periods are called ice ages. The duration of these ice ages spanned hundreds and thousands of years. The last ice age on our Earth also lasted for several thousand years. Humans lived in caves during this last ice age and went out in groups to hunt for food. During this last ice age, approximately 20 to 25,000 years ago, a group of hunters set out from Siberia in search of prey. While looking around, searching through bushes and rocks, they somehow got lost and ended up on a path that was unknowingly leading them to a new world. That group of hunters had absolutely no idea that the icy surface they were walking on, slipping and stumbling, was actually a bridge, a narrow pathway between 2 continents. This path had emerged only because during the Ice Age, due to the freezing of water, the sea levels had dropped significantly. Shallow areas between seas had appeared creating routes between small and large islands, islets, and lakes. This was one such path. This group of hunters brought the genes of the Old World with them. They crossed this narrow path and entered the New World, and eventually settled there. Then, 11,000 years ago, when this last ice age on our planet ended, the sea levels rose again, and that narrow strip of land was submerged under deep water once more. That same path, which this group of hunters had crossed to enter the New World, was gone. The land connection between the ancient world and the New World was severed. The route was gone. We call this place the Bering Strait. In this strait you just saw, there is a point where the distance between the New World and the Old World is only 85 kilometers, just 85 kilometers. But it took the inhabitants of the Old World 10,500 years to cover this short distance of 85 kilometers and reach the New World. How were these thousands of years in the New World? Who discovered this world and how? What happened to its original inhabitants? And how did a continent here become the superpower of today's world? I am Anchor Name, and in Deciphering History, we are bringing you the story of this lost land, the history of America. So, the people who went to the New World, that group of hunters, over centuries and millennia, spread across this very large piece of land. These people also laid the foundation of great civilizations and established countless small and large cities and settlements in various islands. Just look at this map. This is a very old map of this new world, i.e., the Americas. The place where Mexico is today, there used to be a great kingdom, an empire there. Spread over more than 2 lakh square kilometers, this empire included around 500 cities, and 60 lakh people lived here. To the south of this Aztec empire, the area up to this point was the stronghold of the Maya civilization. This civilization was about 4,000 years old. It had achieved great fame in art and culture. After the Maya, a very big civilization existed here in the form of the Inca Empire. If we look at this empire in today's terms, it stretched from the border of present-day Ecuador to the regions of Chile and Argentina. The population of their kingdom was approximately 1,20 lakh. Apart from these civilizations, all across this region, there were many small and big tribes living, like the Caribs in the islands of the West Indies, and similarly, throughout America, from Canada to Brazil and beyond, people lived in mostly small settlements. You could call them tribes. They had a favorite crop, which they cultivated on a large scale, corn, maize. These people of the New World, who loved corn, numbered in the crores. At the same time, in the Old World, there were also about 5 crore people. But these crores of people on both sides were completely unaware of each other's existence. In fact, for them, the other world simply didn't exist, not in stories, not on any map, and not in anyone's memory. Because their connection had been severed for 11,000 years. Yes, it is true that according to some stories, a few lost people from the Old World occasionally reached the shores of the New World by mistake. Some of these people even wrote about it. In a Chinese chronicle from the 3rd century, i.e., about 1700 years ago from today, there is mention of a distant, strange land. In Chinese records, this land was written as Fu Song, which means a place outside this world, the place beyond the horizon. It is written that on the eastern shores of the present-day sea near China, if you travel thousands of kilometers towards the east after landing, you encounter another sea, which is blue in color, very calm, and deep. It is possible that this refers to the Americas, because the Americas lie to the east of China, and crossing that ocean leads to another ocean, i.e., the Atlantic Ocean. Similarly, in 458 AD, a Buddhist monk named Wusheng started a sea voyage from China with 4 companions. He returned after living in a strange land for 40 years, which he also named Fusang, according to Chinese tradition. He also wrote his travelogue describing the conditions there. 500 years later, around 1000 AD, Viking sailors also reached America, and they established their settlements in the area of Newfoundland, where Canada is today. Models of these settlements still exist there. Similar to the Chinese and Vikings, some Muslims also claim that they reached America in the 10th century during the Umayyad Caliphate of Abd al-Rahman III in Spain. In fact, they claim they even established settlements there, built a mosque, and spread the name of Islam there. Hindus also have similar claims that Native Americans worshipped Shivling, meaning sometime in the past some Hindu from India reached there, went to America. That's why some Native American tribes worshipped Shivling. So, friends, there are many such claims. But the thing is, whether these claims are true or false doesn't really matter. What mattered was the realization that if someone were to actually discover this land, this world, and correctly understand that there is a new world, and establish a connection between this new world and the old world, if people started coming and going, then, friends, that route wasn't going to be opened by the Chinese, or by Viking voyages, or by any Muslim or Hindu voyage. The connection between the two worlds hadn't been made, and it was correctly understood that the unfamiliarity that existed between the two worlds for thousands of years persisted. The people of the Old World continued to believe that the world ended at the shores of Europe and Africa. And the Native Americans also believed that beyond their coasts, there was only water, nothing else, like an endless ocean. These distances could have persisted for thousands more years. But then it happened, the 15th century. Yes, the 15th century. In this century, such a shift occurred in the international power dynamics, in the game of power, that it changed everything. The people of the Old World, especially the people of Europe, became so desperate that they were forced to step out of their comfort zone, out of their familiar geography, to search for new routes and new lands. This change, this shift, had come about because of Muslim conquests. This was music. The Old World, which Native Americans had left 25,000 years ago, was dominated by Europe until before the 15th century. Europe was a dominant force. The Roman Empire remained the world's sole superpower for hundreds of years, and its rule extended to many parts of Asia as well. But gradually, the Roman Empire weakened, and ultimately, only one shadow of it remained, the Byzantine Empire. That city was Constantinople, which was called the Eastern Roman Empire or Sultanate, remembered for its ancient glory and protected by powerful walls. Then, in 1453, this last symbol of the Roman Empire was also destroyed by the Turks. A young Turkish sultan, Mehmed the Conqueror, captured Constantinople and wiped out the Roman Empire forever. The city's name was also changed from Constantinople to Istanbul. So, by the 15th century, Europe's power was waning, and it was now shrouded in a kind of deep sorrow because Constantinople was not just an important military base, it was also a key city for European trade. It was the center of East-West trade. It had been inhabited since before the Roman Empire. The famous Emperor Constantine had also built a magnificent church there, the Hagia Sophia. Therefore, the Christians of all of Europe held this city in deep reverence. But besides reverence, this city had another importance. Because this city was a lifeline for trade from Asia, especially China, to Europe. Chinese silk, spices, precious stones, gold, silver, and who knows what else used to come to Europe through this route via Central Asian markets. Now, with Constantinople falling into the hands of the Turks, this route was closed. Due to this, the people of Europe fell into a kind of strange predicament, both economically and spiritually. Mentally, because the closure of trade routes led to a severe reduction in employment opportunities in Europe. People started becoming poor. They faced such scarcity that there were not even grains to eat. Desperate people would throw their children onto garbage heaps. Peasants were forced to work hard or take loans at high interest, living a life of virtual slavery. Then, friends, it started happening that hungry, naked people, to save their own lives, started looting. The number of such criminals increased so much that people walking in the streets of Europe started keeping their eyes on the sky instead of the ground. The reason was that criminals hiding in houses would throw stones from windows to crush the heads of passers-by, and then loot whatever they could from the bodies of these dead. The wise thing was to walk while looking up and being cautious. The rich had hired guards, but common people were dying in the open. Government guards were also helpless in this situation. So, friends, this was the economic devastation that befell Europe after Constantinople was lost and trade routes were closed. The second devastation was spiritual. The staunchly religious people of Europe felt that one by one, the lands of Christianity were falling into the hands of Muslims. So, their situation was that this was a difficult time for Christianity. Their lands were shrinking day by day. They felt that if this continued, perhaps Christianity itself would cease to exist, or at least its powerful status would be destroyed. So, these were the reasons that forced the players of Europe, its desperate class, to search for a new world. But where could such a world possibly be found? They didn't know that to their west, at a distance of just 4,500 kilometers, lay a world whose area was roughly equal to the area of this entire known world, and which was overflowing with natural resources like gold, silver, and forests. They only knew about the world that could be reached by traveling eastwards to China and Japan. The mention of these two, i.e., China and Japan, was common in every household in Europe those days. And this was because Marco Polo's travelogue had now reached everywhere in Europe. Marco Polo had called China Cathay, and Japan Sapangu. About Japan, he had written that the roofs of the royal palaces there are made of gold, doors and windows are also adorned with gold, and often the floors of rooms are laid with gold plates 2 inches thick. Similarly, he had presented exaggerated and highly embellished tales of China and its Mongol ruler Kublai Khan's wealth. Although Marco Polo's travelogue was written about a century and a half earlier, for the desperate Europeans in these bad times, Marco Polo's travelogue was the only ray of hope. So, this travelogue of Marco Polo was creating a movement among European youth to somehow reach China and Japan, find some way, and try to obtain the wealth whose spicy tales Marco Polo had written. But the problem was that the land route had been closed by the Turks. The other route went via the Mediterranean Sea through Egypt. This route was also, as you can see on the map, under the control of Muslim sultanates. Moreover, throughout the Mediterranean Sea, there were various small and large Islamic emirates that would attack European ships. So, Europeans couldn't get any safe passage from there either. In a way, the Muslims had surrounded them from the front. Another route, which explorers like Bartholomew Dias had attempted, was to reach Asia by sailing around Africa. But this route was very long, very lengthy. Even a one-way journey could take months. Now, Europeans couldn't figure out which route to take to reach Asia, one that was both within their means and short, so that they could trade and recover from their despair. In this atmosphere of despair, a relatively unknown sailor came forward. He claimed that he knew the shortest route to China and Japan in Asia. According to him, it was a route that went straight across the Atlantic Ocean, and no major threat could endanger them on this path. This was a huge gamble that could change the fate of Europe and its people. The one making this claim was a young man named Christopher Columbus. Music. Hailing from the city of Genoa in Italy, Columbus had spent a large part of his life at sea. Like other youths of his time, he was greatly influenced by Marco Polo's travelogues. Moreover, he claimed to be an expert in navigating routes with the help of the sun, moon, and stars. By that time, educated people knew that the earth was round. Columbus also believed this. So, his idea was that since the world is round, if you travel straight west from Europe, you would reach Japan Sapangu at a distance of only about 4 or 4.5 thousand kilometers. If the shortest route to Japan was found, then China would also be found, and all of Asia would be within reach. In Columbus's view, finding Asia was like discovering a gold mine, from which you could extract as much gold as you wanted and bring it back to Europe. But Columbus's dream wasn't just about gold and wealth. He also called himself a Christ-bearer. Actually, in Christian tradition, there was a famous figure named Christopher, who was said to have carried Jesus Christ across a river on his shoulders. This Christopher was remembered in the Christian world as the Christ-bearer. So, This sailor Christopher Columbus also had the aspiration that just as the historical figure Christopher had helped Christ cross the river, he might also be able to guide the sinking ship of Christianity to safety. In his view, this could be achieved by finding a new world for the Christians of Europe, where a great Christian empire could be established. So, friends, with the ambition of filling Europe with gold and establishing a Christian empire, Christopher Columbus started knocking on the doors of European courts. He went from Italy to Portugal, from Portugal to England, presenting his idea of sailing west everywhere, trying to secure investment. But the courts were in bad shape those days. They were already broken by grief and were desperate themselves. But the fact was that perhaps no monarch agreed to help him. Nevertheless, he didn't give up his idea. In 1485, he went to Spain. At that time, Spain was ruled by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. In Spain, Columbus kept trying to meet the Queen for 7 years. The Queen didn't have time for a stranger like him. At that time, she and the King were busy expelling Muslims from Spain. Finally, when the last Muslim stronghold in Spain, Granada, fell in 1491–92, the Queen summoned Columbus to her court. Columbus shared his idea with the Queen and convinced her that his plan was a superior one that would succeed under any circumstances. He told her that the lands he was going to discover, i.e., China and Japan, would yield so much wealth, so much gold, that Spain would become wealthy beyond measure. Not only that, but Columbus would go to the newly discovered lands of Asia. He said it would be easy to Christianize the people there, and then the rule of Spain, a Christian empire, would extend there. Perhaps influenced by greed, and perhaps swayed by religious sentiments, the Queen announced permission and financial aid for this sea voyage. Columbus had achieved his first success at the Spanish court. But Queen Isabella did not know that she was believing Columbus's words blindly. He was deceiving not just the Queen, but also his own crew. It was a deception that put all their lives at risk. What was that deception? Why did his companions plan to kill Columbus during the voyage? What did this sailor see in his obsessive quest to reach Asia? We will show you all this. But first, in the second part of the history of America, we will see how Christopher Columbus had deceived the Queen of Spain and his crew. Because he projected himself as a much more skilled captain and navigator than he actually was. He wasn't that great a captain or an expert navigator. He knew how to navigate routes with the help of some conditions, had done small jobs on a few ships, and had some knowledge of sea conditions. But overall, he was a first-class amateur, an ordinary sailor. This ordinary, inexperienced captain was heading towards an unknown destination, and as time passed, his crew was turning against him. It got to the point where one day, the crew made a plan to kill Christopher Columbus. Why did the crew want to kill their captain? How did Columbus escape this deadly conspiracy? And how did this wanderer finally discover the lands of the New World? I am Anchor Name, and in the second part of our new series, History of America, on Deciphering History, we will show you all this. Before departing on the voyage, the Spanish government made several promises to Columbus. One promise was that Columbus would be included in Spain's elite class. He would be given the official Spanish title of Don, which meant gentleman. But it had another implication. People with this title and their future generations would use the word Don before their names, the same Don used in names like Don Quixote. The second promise was that Columbus would be given the title of Grand Admiral of the Ocean Sea. He would have the same ranks, honors, and privileges that were held by the high admirals of the Spanish kingdom. A tenth part of whatever precious stones, etc., were found in the areas he discovered would also go to Columbus. It was also decided that for ships trading in these regions, an eighth share of the cargo space would be reserved for Columbus's goods. Besides Columbus's crew, the Spanish government also made a promise: the crew member who first sighted the land of Asia would receive a lifelong annual pension of 10,000 maravedis. Its present value, you could say, is close to $1,500. The Spanish government was making all these promises for the future. At that time, regarding what Columbus needed immediately, the Queen of Spain was somewhat frugal. Moreover, as you saw in the last episode, Europe's conditions had become extremely bad. So, the Queen gave Columbus only 2 ships for such an important mission. These ships were not given from the royal treasury, rather, they were obtained from the people of the same region from where Columbus was to begin his voyage. The Queen ordered the people of this region: "You had committed some acts in the past that were considered rebellious against our authority. Therefore, you were punished by being required to provide us with 2 ships for 1 year at your own expense. Consequently, we now order you to prepare these ships." So, he got the ships from there, plus the crew. But not much ammunition and food supplies were given to stock them. In total, for both his ships, provisions worth only 8,989 maravedis were provided, along with a few small cannons, a handful of guns, and insufficient food supplies crammed into them. Given these meager supplies and the crew, Columbus himself did a bit of running around and managed to acquire a 3rd ship, the Santa Maria, on credit, which became his flagship. Now there were 3 ships, and on the sails of these 3 were painted large red crosses. On the 3rd of August 1492, Columbus began his historic voyage. On the shore, the Queen and King saw him off with prayers and the ringing of church bells. Passing by the beautiful Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, he was heading towards what he estimated was Asia or Japan. According to his calculations, the distance from the Canary Islands to Japan was approximately 4,500 kilometers. Moreover, such winds blew there that made sailing westwards easy. That's why he had first come here, so he could set sail from here. So, friends, when Columbus departed from here on the 3rd of August, before him lay nothing but the vast ocean, with 3 ships floating on it. Their captain himself didn't really know when, or if, he would ever see land again. Music. For the first few days, friends, the journey was perfectly fine. The wind was very good, and the crew was also peaceful and comfortable. So, the ships kept moving forward very easily. Columbus would have breakfast in his cabin every morning, then come out, look at the sky, and pray for good weather. Then he would meet with the crew, give necessary instructions, and go back to his room. This sea voyage was being determined by the position of the sun, moon, and stars, according to the custom of that time. Columbus wasn't an expert at this, but he projected himself as one. He had a half-circle-shaped wooden instrument, an astrolabe, with which he would hang a weight and monitor the positions of the sun, moon, and stars, and determine his direction accordingly. He kept moving westward somehow. According to the estimates of that time, they should have sighted land within 10 to 15 days. But even after 15 days, not only was there no land in sight, but even signs of land like birds flying around weren't visible. Then Columbus's crew began to lose patience. Rumors started among the crew that this Italian guy, in his quest to become wealthy and a Don, wanted to get us killed. If a few more days pass like this and our food runs out, our lives are as good as gone. After 21 days passed like this, the crew began to see their lives clearly in danger. They felt that if they stayed with Columbus's obsession, they would die of hunger and thirst at sea and become food for fish. They demanded Columbus turn back, but Columbus refused. Seeing their death looming, some crew members started thinking about killing Columbus himself. Because if they killed him, the return journey would obviously begin. By now, such talk had started among the crew that was with Columbus. Their argument was that Columbus wasn't Spanish, he was from Italy, whereas the rest of the crew was Spanish. So, there was also an element of nationality or narrow-mindedness. Throwing this Italian into the sea wouldn't harm our Spanish nation. Upon return, we'll say he died from an illness. At least by him dying, the rest of us Spaniards would save our lives. After this thinking took hold, the crew began to rebel against Columbus. They often flatly refused to obey his orders. In fact, they would angrily speak of killing him. Conditions were getting more dangerous for Columbus day by day. He then started thinking about giving more and more incentives to the crew, trying to control them by tempting them with rewards. But he wasn't having much success. The crew saw their death right in front of them. Who thinks about rewards in such a situation? In this despair and trouble, they started having hallucinations, like a thirsty person sees mirages of water in the desert. Similarly, his crew would repeatedly feel that they saw land ahead, that they had reached Asia. But when the ships would head towards that direction where some people thought they saw land, even after traveling for miles, they would find no land, just endless water, miles deep. Even the blue sky started looking like water to them. Up, down, right, left, front, back, just water, water everywhere. Amidst this despair, failure, quarrels, and death threats, one of the crew members suddenly started screaming like a madman, pointing at birds chirping in the sky. The entire crew joined him, staring at the sky. On the evening of October 7th, Columbus and his crew saw real birds flying. These were migratory birds migrating from America to escape the severe cold, heading towards the islands of the West Indies. Seeing so many birds together was like finding paradise. Music. The sight of birds was nothing short of divine help for Columbus. He also turned the direction of his ships towards where the birds were going. He gave his crew the good news. Following these birds, they would soon reach land. But even after traveling for several more days, no land appeared. The sighting of birds was certainly not a mirage now, because as they moved forward, the birds' noise kept increasing. This noise had become their hope. They were desperate to see land as soon as possible. But 3 more days passed. Sometimes they saw birds, sometimes they didn't, but there was still no trace of land. The ship's crew sank back into deep despair. They surrounded Columbus and intended to kill him. The crew gave Columbus a final warning: order the ships to turn back, or they would kill him and throw him into the sea. Columbus had been holding them back for 5 weeks with promises, warnings, and the lure of rewards. Now he had no new trick left in his mind to control them. As a last resort, he promised the crew that they should give him just 3 days. If land is sighted within 3 days, fine, otherwise, he would agree to turn back. Failure weighed heavily on Columbus. He pushed the ships to full speed during these 3 days. He didn't even care if one of his ships hit some unseen reef and sank. Ignoring every risk, he was sailing his 3 ships westward at full speed. He would restlessly pace the ship's deck, eagerly scanning the distant horizon. It was the night between the 11th and 12th of October. The time was 10 p.m. He saw a light on the horizon. Friends, this wasn't an era with electric lights that could be seen from miles away. So, what kind of light was it? Columbus himself didn't know what kind of light it was. He called his crew out and asked them to come and see this light. But his crew didn't see any light. Some expressed confusion, but the mystery couldn't be solved. It was probably just Columbus's hallucination. After all, if we look today, the nearest island from where Columbus saw that light was 256 kilometers away, and even if you lit 400,000 candles there, that light could not have reached Columbus. But just 4 hours after this hallucination of light, a man standing on the high mast of the third ship, the Pinta, actually saw a sand dune in the distance. At 2 a.m., under the shining moonlight, the sand dune was glistening like the moon itself. After rubbing his eyes for a few moments, when he was sure that this was no mirage, it was land, he shouted, "Tierra! Tierra! Tierra! Land! Land! Land!" Following the signal from the ship's captain, a small cannon was fired, alerting the other 2 ships that land had been sighted. After 36 days of exhausting voyage, Columbus's sea expedition had reached the shores of the New World. The world lost for 11,000 years had been found. What happened next was that Columbus told the captain of the Pinta, Rodrigo de Triana, "You have sighted land." The captain of the Pinta said, "Sir, my name won't be forgotten now, will it?" Columbus replied, "I will give you 5,000 maravedis in addition later." After reaching land, the same crew that was bent on killing Columbus suddenly started praising him and asking for forgiveness, worried that Columbus might, in anger, forget their names. Because many of them had tried to kill him. And indeed, that's what happened. The man who had stood on the mast and sighted land first did not receive the reward fixed for it. Columbus took that reward for himself. Columbus claimed that he had seen the light 4 hours before that man. And that light was supposedly coming from that island. But what kind of solar lights were installed there, friends, that could be seen from so many kilometers away? It was a delusion, a deception. When Columbus realized this delusion, he was convinced he had reached Asia. He had no idea that he wasn't in Asia or India, but had arrived on a new land that had been populated by inhabitants of the Old World 25,000 years ago. He had discovered the land that had been lost for 11,000 years. The connection between the 2 worlds had been severed 11,000 years ago when the Ice Age ended. the land where this happened, their Columbus. Besides this, those who should have been heroes, friends, became integral parts. History gave them the title of villains instead of gentlemen of history. Why? How did the local people welcome Columbus in the islands? The new world that Columbus thought was China and Japan. What was the treatment meted out to the local people in his quest for gold? We will show you all this in the next part of History of America. When Columbus's ship landed on the shores of the New World Islands, the local people, the Native Americans, felt as if something new had descended from the sky onto the land. They stared in amazement, sometimes at the huge ships, sometimes at the humans dressed in colorful clothes, who also had 2 legs and 2 arms like them. All this was very new to them. They innocently climbed onto their ships. They started sharing everything they had with Columbus's crew out of affection. It took them a long time to realize that Columbus, who outwardly seemed sweet as honey, and his companions were actually enemies of their freedom and their lives. What treatment did Columbus mete out to the New World and its innocent people? Why did all of Marco Polo's stories start seeming false to him? I am Anchor Name, and in the third part of History of America on Deciphering History, we will show you exactly this. Music. Some islands in America, slightly to the east, scattered, which we call the West Indies today. Among them is an island named San Salvador. This is the historic island where Columbus's ships landed on October 12, 1492. San Salvador is a small island, 21 kilometers long and 8 kilometers wide. Native Americans called this island Guanahani. This name was given after a lizard-like animal called iguana, which is now extinct from this island. Back then, it was a dense jungle, with salty ponds and small hills. Today, this island is part of the Bahamas and remains mostly deserted. So, friends, in 1492, when Columbus was approaching the shores of San Salvador, the people living on the island saw them from afar, and this news spread among their own people. The arrival of these strange guests created a stir on the island. The island's people started gathering to see these ships. Some of them jumped into the sea and even climbed onto a few ships. There was a childlike innocence and joy on their faces. They were welcoming the Europeans as if someone had descended from the sky onto the earth. On the land they knew, there was no question of having such large ships and wearing such colorful clothes. The island's people were used to living in simple huts made of grass and twigs. They only wore loincloths. They ate boiled roots. So, for them, the sight of Columbus's fleet was nothing short of a great spectacle. When Columbus arrived on the island by boat, the local people welcomed him warmly. However, Columbus spent some time on land and then returned to his ship anchored a little distance from the shore. A few days later, Columbus and his companions lowered their boats into the sea from their ships and, sailing along the island's coast, started moving towards its northern part. By then, all the people of the island's settlements knew about the arrival of the strangers. The local people stood along the shore welcoming them. They had laid out food and drink items for them. They were even presenting them with beautiful parrots of various colors. In return, Columbus and his companions gave them red caps and some bells. The Native Americans looked curiously at the bells, ringing them and enjoying the sound. The atmosphere was completely friendly, and the local people were following Columbus around. It was a very charming scene. But Columbus's mind was seeing something else in this scene. He was observing that although the island's people were very simple, with no clothes to wear, no palaces or grand places of worship, some of them wore rings in their noses which seemed to be made of gold. He began to think that perhaps he had indeed reached Cipangu, Japan, one of the islands Marco Polo had mentioned. Marco Polo had written that near Cipangu, there is a small group of islands, and Columbus had read this entire travelogue, like other European youths of that time. In fact, it was based on this travelogue that he had started this mission to discover the westward route to Japan and China. So, Columbus decided to spend very little time here and move on. He wanted to reach Cipangu, i.e., Japan, as soon as possible. But before leaving, he did one more thing. He tried to obtain as much gold as possible from the local people. And obtaining gold from them would have been very easy, because as Columbus wrote in his diary, on this island, San Salvador, and the nearby islands, all the people he saw were naked, without clothes. They had no iron, steel, or any other weapons. Nor did they know how to use weapons that could kill a person. Columbus also writes that with the help of just 50 men, these people could be subdued and made to do whatever was wanted. They were so innocent and carefree about their possessions, their position, that one wouldn't believe such people could exist in the world. Whatever you asked from them, they would give, and they never said no. So, friends, these people, unaware of war and the modern concept of ownership, were helpless before Columbus and his crew. Columbus and his companions took advantage of their innocence and started searching their houses for gold. They would rummage through the houses, looking for gold. The Native Americans watched this treatment of their homes but still couldn't understand what these people ultimately wanted. In fact, they kept on welcoming them. When, after several days of searching, Columbus became convinced that there was no gold here except for a few nose rings, he decided to move on towards Cipangu, Japan. He forcibly captured some local people and imprisoned them on his ship. Columbus's purpose was to teach them a bit of his language, use them as translators, and with their help, find Cipangu and China behind these small islands, as Marco Polo had written. But there was no Cipangu or China there at all. Columbus's guides had never even heard the names of Cipangu or China. From Columbus's talk, they understood that he was talking about some very large island, and these guides did know the location of a large nearby island. So, they now led him to a nearby island. This was the place where the country of Cuba is located today. Columbus was convinced that he was just about to reach Japan. But when he arrived at the Cuban coast on October 28, there was no gold there either. He kept thinking that perhaps he had reached Cathay, i.e., China. Now he kept searching in Cuba for the magnificent cities of China, whose stories he had read in Marco Polo's travelogue. But it soon became evident that this region was also not China. It was not even Japan. In his view, this was neither China nor Japan, nor were these places overflowing with gold. Just here and there, people had some gold rings in their noses and ears. Columbus was astonished and troubled seeing all this. What was going on? Had Marco Polo lied in his dreams? Wasn't there gold everywhere here? Disappointed and dejected, Columbus, on his own, started searching for a famous city of China, known in Europe as Zidon, which is now called Guangzhou. As Columbus's ships were sailing along the coast of Cuba, the wind started blowing against them, and they were directly taken to another island about 100 kilometers away. The inhabitants of this island called it Haiti. Columbus reached this island on December 6. He named it La Isla Española, Hispaniola. Even today, this island is known by this name. With Columbus's landing on Hispaniola, the saga of the destruction of Native Americans, the horrific story of their massacre, began. Some historians even call it the American Holocaust. Let's find out what happened to the Native Americans. Their story is worth knowing. Protecting their tourist paradise, West Indies' second largest island is Hispaniola. Today, on this island, there are two countries named the Dominican Republic and Haiti. But when Columbus arrived, this island had no such political divisions, and here too lived some people of the Arawak tribe. In fact, their numbers had reached up to 8 lakhs. These people also welcomed Columbus warmly, as had happened on the other islands. Seeing this island, Columbus felt that either he had reached Cipangu, Japan, or somewhere where large quantities of gold existed. Interestingly, due to his religious background, he also began to think that perhaps Hispaniola was connected to the place from which, according to the Bible, Prophet Solomon, peace be upon him, had brought vast amounts of gold, diamonds, spices, etc. Or maybe this area was part of the kingdom called Sheba in the Bible, whose queen had summoned Prophet Solomon to her court. And friends, Prophet Solomon's kingdom was in Palestine. Where is Palestine and where is Hispaniola? How did this idea come to him? It can only be said that Columbus was convinced that no unfamiliar world existed outside the stories of the Bible. So now, based on Bible stories, Columbus was thinking that Hispaniola must surely be overflowing with gold. Another reason was that Columbus and his companions had seen small, shiny gold flakes in the rivers of Hispaniola. Moreover, a local chieftain in Hispaniola also presented Columbus with a mask made of gold. Now Columbus's patience reached its limit. He thought that the local people knew about gold but weren't telling him. Although there wasn't as much gold on this island as he imagined, it was somewhat hidden in the streams and rivers. Interestingly, today's Hispaniola has proven to be an island rich in minerals. The gold, silver, and copper reserves hidden in the mountains of just the Dominican Republic side of Hispaniola are estimated to be worth over $20 billion. But obviously, Columbus didn't know this at the time, nor did the Native Americans know anything about it. They didn't have the modern tools to search for wealth like we do today. So, they weren't able to extract or find that gold in large quantities. Nevertheless, Columbus decided that he would return to Spain and come back with more people and thoroughly search every corner of this island to find the gold. Friends, by that time, some skirmishes had already started between Columbus's crew and the local people. At one place, Columbus's companions killed 2 local people. Their only fault was that they were not ready to provide the Europeans with bows and arrows or other items as needed. But these were just isolated incidents. No major conflict had occurred yet with the Native Americans. Columbus had mentally marked Hispaniola as a treasure trove where, in his view, gold existed. So, he thought it necessary to establish a settlement here before returning to Spain, where his crew could stay and continue searching for gold in his absence. Columbus found this base right from his ship, because his ship Santa Maria had run aground near the coast of Haiti. Therefore, Columbus's companions dismantled it, and using its wood and timber, they constructed a small fort at that very spot, which was called Fuerte Navidad, Fort Christmas. Columbus stationed 39 of his men there. He gave these people strict orders to find gold, and on January 16, 1493, he set sail back to Spain. On the return journey, Columbus also forcibly took some Native Americans as slaves. They were kept in terrible conditions on the ship, causing several slaves to freeze to death en route. Besides slaves and some spices, he certainly took enough gold from Hispaniola so that when he returned to Spain, people wouldn't mock him, and they would see that he had indeed brought back gold as promised. Upon reaching Spain, Columbus announced that he had discovered a new route to Asia and that immense gold was present there. The Spanish rulers believed Columbus's claims. He was given the title, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, which Spain had promised to give him if he discovered the westward route to Asia. Columbus had now become part of Spain's elite. Columbus was being celebrated and honored everywhere. But amidst these honors, he was also mocked. Why was Columbus, who is called the discoverer of the New World, the explorer, responsible for killing 8 lakh local people on just one island? Why did the local people of the New World fight against dangerous weapons with a small herb, a fruit? What case was filed against Columbus, and how were his final days spent? We will show you all this in the next part of History of America. In the New World, Columbus and his Spanish companions inflicted such atrocities on the local people that even a Spanish writer, while writing about them, trembled. In just over a decade, Columbus's forces killed 8 lakh people, 8 million people. Why did the local inhabitants, who had lived peacefully for thousands of years in such a large world, have to see such bad days? Why did Columbus, who should have been a hero, become a villain? How were his final days spent? I am Anchor Name, and in the History of America series on Deciphering History, we will show you exactly this. Music. It is said that at a banquet, someone said to Columbus, "So what great feat have you accomplished by discovering the route to Asia? If you hadn't discovered it, someone else would have." Upon this, Columbus asked for some eggs and told the guests to try and stand them upright on the table. The people tried hard but failed. The egg would roll over every time. Then Columbus took an egg, tapped one end lightly on the table to flatten it slightly, and then easily stood it upright on the table's surface. Through this, Columbus conveyed to the audience that once a task is done, it seems easy to everyone. But the real credit for success should go to the one who did it first. Now, friends, this incident might be a legend, a fictional story, but Columbus had once again convinced the Spanish rulers with his words. He demanded from the rulers that a large force be sent with him towards this newly discovered route to the New World, or Asia, as he thought, so that he could bring back as much gold as possible from the regions he had discovered and deposit it in Spain. Besides this, Columbus also tempted the Spanish government with slaves, saying that the people there would prove to be very good slaves if brought to Spain. The Spanish rulers were so impressed by Columbus's words that they handed over to him a large fleet of 17 ships. Besides 1,300 crew members on these ships, There were also a number of professionals, including soldiers, with swords, guns, and horses. This time, a heavy cavalry was also with them. In addition, there were also fierce dogs. This entire force was much larger than Columbus's previous expedition. Because on the first voyage, you may recall, he had only about 90 crew members, whereas this time he had a force of nearly 2,000 men. This was such a large force that it could crush the entire population of Hispaniola. Columbus reached Hispaniola with this large fleet at maximum possible speed. But when he landed on the shore, he received a shock. The 39 men he had left behind at Fort Christmas were all dead. The thing was, after Columbus left for Spain, those men had started roaming around in gangs searching for gold. These people would abduct women and children, keep them captive, then commit sexual assault on them, and force them into labor. The result was that one day, the local people's patience ran out, and they attacked, killed the Europeans, and burned down the fort. When Columbus saw this condition of his companions, he went berserk. He ordered the soldiers who had come with him to search for gold and to massacre the local population. So, the Europeans now spread across the island, looting the settlements. But by then, word had spread throughout the island that these white people were not good. They had come to enslave them and loot their gold. Now, the local inhabitants were weak. They could not fight the Spanish force. So, most of them fled their settlements, leaving them deserted. This was why the Spanish invaders mostly found empty villages and houses when they arrived. Not only were there no people, but, despite searching village after village, the Spanish invaders couldn't find even a single nugget of gold. By 1495, when Columbus had been wandering around the West Indies for about 3 years, he was becoming frustrated with his continuous failure because he wasn't finding gold. Then he decided to compensate for the lack of gold with slaves. So, in 1495, he gathered all his forces and attacked the green and fertile lands to capture the people of this region for enslavement. In this campaign, 1,500 men, women, and children were captured and imprisoned in pens like animals, chained and guarded by soldiers and dogs. Among them, 500 slaves who appeared healthier and stronger were sent to Spain. About 200 of these Native Americans died during the sea voyage itself due to diseases. Those who survived and reached Spain were sold in the markets. But these poor Native Americans could not withstand the European climate, as they were not used to it for centuries, for thousands of years. They too started dying one by one. Soon, Columbus realized that sending Native Americans as slaves to Spain was futile. So, he had to find gold at any cost. Consequently, he started extracting forced labor from the local population. Columbus ordered all men aged 14 years or more to find and bring a specific amount of gold every 3 months. If they brought the gold, they were given a copper token to hang around their necks. The man who didn't have this token had his hands cut off and was left to bleed to death until he died. Crimes increased further from this. Thousands of local people were captured and forced to go into the mountains, made to search every mountain from top to bottom multiple times. Those who sifted through streams to find gold had to stand in water constantly, which broke their backs. At least 1/3 of the people died from hunger and disease during these labors. Men were sent far away to work in the mountains, while the Spanish forced their women to work the land. And friends, they worked the local men and women so hard that an entire generation was wiped out. Firstly, their children were not being born anymore. Even if they were born, mothers couldn't breastfeed them because hunger and diseases were diminishing their ability to nurse their children. Columbus and his Spanish companions had sunk to such depths in their search for gold that they weren't even willing to give mothers time to care for their children. Consequently, thousands of children died crying from hunger. Some mothers, in desperation, even drowned their own children in water because they couldn't bear to see them die crying. So, men died in the mines, and children lost their lives due to lack of milk. Within a short time, this land, which was very lush and green, was emptied of human existence. A Spanish writer had the opportunity to visit there a few years after Columbus's expeditions. He witnessed such scenes of human cruelty that he trembled from head to toe while writing about them. As time passed, the cruelty of the European invaders didn't decrease, it kept increasing. The Spanish had become so accustomed to luxury that they considered even walking beneath their dignity. So, for their transportation, they used Native Americans like animals. If they needed to go somewhere in a hurry, they would ride on the back of a Native American, or they would sit in a kind of hammock-like litter made of ropes, and two Native Americans would carry them, walking back and forth. There would also be other slaves accompanying them, shading them with leaves and fanning them with palm fronds. To these European invaders, who had now become their masters, the blood and honor of Native Americans meant nothing. Those who had come as explorers had turned into savage beasts. How savage! Some soldiers would capture local people just to check the sharpness of their knives and swords, then slice flesh from their bodies and watch them writhe in agony. This was a common pastime for them. The situation was such that once, Spanish soldiers beheaded two Native American boys for snatching their parrots. Just for fun, just for a few minutes of entertainment, they cut off the necks of two innocent children. Friends, this dance of death wasn't just being played out in Hispaniola. The other islands of the West Indies were also coming under its sway. There too, people were falling victim to massacres, hunger, and disease. In just 3 months in Cuba alone, 7,000 children died. The Native Americans who were still alive watched all this. They were tired of this massacre, torture, and inhuman behavior. They also tried to fight back against the Europeans, but were defeated every time. They started leaving their areas and taking refuge in the mountains and jungles. Spanish soldiers would pursue them with their dogs, shoot them, or capture them and set their fierce dogs on them, which would tear these innocents apart and kill them. When the local people had no other option against this brutal and unjust oppression, they decided to use a fruit as a last resort. The name of this fruit in the local language was cassava. This fruit saved millions of Native Americans from the Europeans' tyranny. How? Music. The sweet. They ate this fruit cassava, and also prepared poison from some of its varieties. Native Americans now started extracting poison from its poisonous varieties. Normally, they would apply this poison to arrows and hunt animals with their companions. But this time, they decided to use the poison on themselves. The Arawak people started using cassava on a large scale for suicide. They would even poison their own nursing children to give them eternal relief from the tyranny of Columbus and his Spanish companions. Not all people could happily die, though. Many managed to flee to other islands and save their lives. One such person was the chieftain of Hispaniola, Hatway. He managed to save some of his people and fled to Cuba. He also had a little gold with him. Upon reaching a place in Cuba, Hatway placed the gold before all his people and said, "This is the thing for which we are being killed." Then, to save his tribe from the greed and crimes of the Spanish, he threw that gold into the river. He must have thought, "Let this gold disappear." But this effort of his was also in vain. When the Spanish invaders turned towards Cuba, they hunted down Hatway. The invaders killed more than half of his tribe's people. Those who remained were enslaved and forced into labor. As for their chieftain Hatway, they neither shot him nor enslaved him. Instead, they tied him to a pile of wood and set it on fire. But before dying, Hatway uttered some words that shamed European priests for centuries. It is said that when Hatway was being tied to the stake, a priest told him to feel Christ close to his heart so that his soul would enter heaven instead of hell. Hatway replied, "If heaven is the place where Christians like you go, then I prefer to go to hell." Thus, friends, countless humans were killed by gold-hungry men. If there was one person fundamentally responsible for all this massacre and destruction, it was the leader of this expedition, Christopher Columbus. Despite all his greed and crimes, he couldn't send enough gold to Spain as he had promised. Instead of gold, complaints against him were reaching the royal court thick and fast. The stories of how fast he was exterminating the local population and committing atrocities moved even some in Spain. Columbus's trial was about to begin, and his own two brothers played a key role in this trial. Columbus had also brought his two brothers to Hispaniola. When Columbus returned to Spain for the second time in 1496, he left his brothers in charge of the island. Both brothers strengthened and dangerously escalated the brutal system Columbus had established. Columbus had started a system where he made the chieftains of the Native Americans responsible for extracting gold from the mountains under their supervision. In Columbus's absence, his brothers did this. They ended Columbus's policy and started the outright plunder of Native Americans, giving contracts to their favorite people for this purpose. But the other Spanish settlers, the people brought to settle the New World, were not given favors, so they and the native chieftains became angry. The Spanish officials were also angry because they had believed Columbus's gold stories, but upon reaching Hispaniola, they found no gold. So, these people rebelled against Columbus and his brothers and lodged a mountain of complaints against Columbus in the Spanish royal court. The court sent Spain's Chief Justice to Hispaniola for an investigation. During this time, Columbus had set foot on the South American mainland, where Venezuela is today. Here too, he was frantically searching for gold, because he still thought he had discovered Asia and China from the other side. As Marco Polo's travelogue said, there was gold there, so there must be gold here too. However, the landscapes were such that he couldn't identify the regions described in the books, but he wasn't ready to accept this, or perhaps he simply wasn't capable. The outcome was that he didn't find gold in Venezuela either and returned empty-handed to Hispaniola. By then, the Spanish official had arrived in Hispaniola and had heard the complaints of the Native Americans and the Spanish settlers against Columbus. After hearing all this and finding it substantiated, he delivered his verdict. Columbus and his two brothers were chained and, in October 1500, the three prisoners were sent to Spain. But Columbus was a very clever man with immense convincing power. So, during the return journey itself, he prepared a letter addressed to the Spanish rulers. This letter was somewhat desperate, but it convinced the king and queen. In the letter, he wrote that although he hadn't found gold yet, he was very close to finding it. After reading the letter, the queen ordered his release, and in December 1500, she even met with him. In this meeting, Columbus convinced them that if he were allowed to go to that island one more time, he would find gold and return. So, they believed him again, granted him permission for one last voyage, and provided the resources. Columbus got permission for this fourth voyage, but he was now removed from the post of governor of the newly discovered lands. He was now returning not as a governor, but as an ordinary explorer. In 1502, Columbus departed on his fourth and final voyage. He was so obsessed with finding Asia that he believed he would meet the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama there. However, Vasco da Gama had discovered a route to Asia via the southern tip of Africa, which was obviously thousands of miles away from where Columbus was. On his final voyage, Columbus wandered through Honduras, Panama, and Nicaragua searching for gold, but he didn't find any. During this time, he once got stranded with 50 companions at a port in Jamaica called Santa Gloria. His food supplies had run out, and he couldn't find a way back either. He anchored his sea-worn ships near the shore and sent some companions in a boat to find a way to reach Hispaniola. After they left, a difficult period began for Columbus. He had no food, and the local people were not willing to provide him with any. Columbus got desperate, so he played a strange trick on the Native Americans. He summoned the local chieftains and threatened them. Columbus told them that God was angry because the local people were being lazy in delivering food to his men. So, he decided to teach them a lesson through punishment and disease. He also said that God would first show a fiery sign in the sky as a warning of the punishment to befall the Native Americans. What Columbus told the chieftains was that they should look at the moon that night, because it would appear red and fiery. Now, obviously, no divine punishment was going to befall the Native Americans. But Columbus knew from the astronomical tables and calculations of the sun, moon, and stars that according to them, in 3 days' time, on February 29, 1504, a total lunar eclipse would occur. So, Columbus, trusting that table, confidently threatened the Native Americans. And it happened just as he said. On the night of February 29, the moon was indeed eclipsed. When the Native Americans saw the lunar eclipse, they believed Columbus's word and, out of fear, started providing food and supplies to Columbus and his men. Columbus had to spend about a year like this in Jamaica. During this time, the companions who had left by boat eventually managed to reach Hispaniola. So, although delayed, help from the Spanish did arrive, and Columbus escaped from Jamaica to Hispaniola. But this, his fourth and final voyage, had also ended in failure. In fact, it was perhaps his most disappointing voyage. So, with the desire to reach Japan and China still in his heart, a dejected Columbus, who had grown old and ill, returned to Spain and remained there until his death in 1506. Columbus, who was responsible for the deaths of millions of innocent Native Americans, lived his final days in Spain with peace of mind. He continued to receive the 10th share of whatever little gold came from the New World, as promised by the Queen. But he remained under the illusion until his death that he had discovered a new route to Asia. Unfortunately, Columbus died in the illusion of Asia and the despair of not finding gold. But others were not fooled. In 1501, an Italian sailor who also visited the newly discovered lands of America surveyed this new world. He traveled from the north down to the south, to the place where Brazil and the Amazon forests are today. He was much more intelligent than Columbus. It didn't take him long to realize that this was not some small island near Asia, but a new world. After his name, Amerigo Vespucci, this new world was named America. Music. Hello friends. The door to the destruction of Native Americans that Columbus had opened did not close with his death. Within 21 years of Columbus's arrival, Hispaniola had been completely emptied of human existence. Approximately 8 million people living on this island, whom Columbus called Indians, had been wiped out by the swords, diseases, and despair brought by the European invaders. According to some estimates, the devastation on Hispaniola was 50 times greater than the American atomic bombing of the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The massacres elsewhere were in addition to this. Friends, this is the island of Hispaniola, in whose soil lie buried those millions of innocent humans who were killed by Columbus and the Spanish invaders. In their place, people from Africa started being brought here to settle, because they didn't die from the diseases brought by the Europeans. They had the immunity or ability to fight European diseases. Not only that, but the descendants of the European settlers and the mixed races are what populate this place today. So, the arrival of slaves from Africa in place of Native Americans marked the beginning of a new era of slavery in America. But the Arawak people, whom Columbus had brought to death and destruction, were not completely wiped out 100%. Some people survived from other islands of the West Indies and moved further down into South America. These people live today in several areas around Venezuela, Guyana, and Suriname. Once, Columbus's name was a symbol of terror for these people. Today, for the surviving generations, Columbus's name is a symbol of hatred. Now, the mission to build a Spanish empire that Columbus had started continued even after his death. The Spanish Empire had completely taken over most of the West Indies, and now its eyes were fixed on those days, on those great empires. This, friends, was the empire of the Native Americans, which truly possessed gold and countless other treasures. But the people of this empire were not weak like the Arawak tribe of the West Indies. They were the most powerful people in the New World. And this empire was the Aztec Empire. The people here put up a strong fight against the Spanish. How did they fight this battle, and what was its outcome? Who became the last wall in Spain's path in America? We will show you all this in the next part of History of America. 11 years after Columbus's death, where Mexico City, the capital of Mexico, stands today, there used to be a large saltwater lake called Lake Texcoco. On this lake was built a huge city called Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, spread over 2 lakh square kilometers. The city was connected to the outside world through 3 causeways. The capital of this 60 lakh population empire was a city unparalleled in its grandeur and magnificence. The city had 60,000 houses and 2 main temples, one for sun worship and the other for other deities. Human sacrifices were also made in these temples, although women and children were not sacrificed. In the city, lush green gardens flourished on rafts. They looked like they were floating on water. We could call them floating gardens. The city had a water supply system through stone channels. The city's markets were always crowded with thousands of people. Gold flowed in the lakes and rivers here, which was extracted by filtering water, smelted, and used. For centuries, the people here were very brave, but due to some of their decisions and some superstitions, they were killed by their own ruler. What were these superstitions? Where did this great civilization, the Aztec civilization, disappear? I am Anchor Name, and in the History of America series on Deciphering History, we will show you exactly this. Music. Among the residents of this wealthy city, there were some customs. One of them was that they were strongly opposed to deceiving their enemy in war. They considered attacking without a declaration of war as cowardly. This custom of theirs proved fatal for them when a Spanish adventurer attacked their empire with just 600 men. The year was 1504. A Spanish soldier named Hernán Cortés arrived in Hispaniola, an island in the West Indies, in search of easy money. He didn't achieve much success there, but when he moved on from there to Cuba, his luck turned. In Cuba, the Spanish governor commissioned Cortés to prepare a force and go to Mexico to establish a Spanish colony. Cortés was subordinate to this governor. So, on February 18, 1519, Cortés departed from Cuba with his 608 soldiers and sailors on 11 ships. Soon, these ships reached the coast of Mexico, passing through the Yucatan Peninsula and arriving near the present-day city of Veracruz. This city was part of the Aztec Empire. The landing of this small force of 600 men was not perceived as a threat by the Aztecs, because they were an empire of 6 million people and considered themselves very powerful. Similarly, Cortés, relying on his firearms and cavalry, did not think much of the Aztecs' power either. But here, Cortés had to suffer losses not because of firearms, but because of his own superstitions. A legend was famous among the Aztecs that their god, who had gone from the world, would return one day. So, when Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Veracruz and brought horses with him, chained together, the local people had never seen horses before. Therefore, they thought that their god had returned. Consequently, instead of fighting the Spanish invaders, the local people started providing them with food and necessary geographical information. From these people, Cortés learned very well about the strengths and weaknesses of the Aztec Empire. So, he started planning an attack on the Aztec capital. But he knew that even with firearms, controlling such a large empire was certainly not possible with just 500 to 600 men. So, he started looking for local people who could become his allies. And he found such people. A large number of them were from the Teutonic region, who were enemies of the Aztec Empire at that time. Well, an enemy's enemy is a friend. So, Cortés allied with these people, in fact, establishing his new military base in their territory. When the news of this reached the Aztec Emperor Montezuma II, The problem was that he was still confused due to his superstitions. Are these people who have come really Spanish invaders, or is there also their God among them, whom the people of this empire were waiting for? Consequently, he did not openly confront Cortés. Instead, he first sent a lot of gold and silver to Cortés through messengers, thinking that if these Spanish were invaders, they should leave the area. He also sent Cortés a sun disk made of gold, 6.5 feet wide, along with a smaller silver disk representing the moon. Cortés's greed was further inflamed by these. What happened then? He sent his helmet back with the messengers to Montezuma, saying, "You put some more gold in this, because my people have a disease that can only be cured by gold." Montezuma, like a generous person, ignoring the joke, had the helmet filled with gold jewelry and sent back. When the helmet returned to him filled with gold, he was convinced that the Aztecs indeed had plenty of gold, a lot of gold. So, he cunningly sent a message to Montezuma that he didn't want war, he just wanted to visit their capital, to see it from the inside. The Aztec emperor permitted this visit. In November 1519, Cortés entered the city with 6 companions and 1,000 Teutonic warriors. Montezuma himself came out of the city to welcome him and hosted him in his palace. But Cortés repaid this hospitality by making Montezuma a prisoner in his own palace. In the palace, armed Spanish soldiers would constantly surround the emperor, not allowing him to go out. The emperor, the host, was free in name only, but in reality, he had become Cortés's prisoner. Through the captive emperor, they would forcibly order gold and other items from outside, bringing them into the palace and piling them up in rooms. They also broke down a wall in the palace and looted the vast amount of gold, many precious artifacts, and other items hidden behind it. If Cortés had gotten a little more time, he would have completely impoverished the Aztecs and then left his mark. But suddenly, a calamity befell him that disrupted his entire game for a while. Music. Actually, Cortés's boss, the governor of Cuba, had sent him on this mission, but Cortés, instead of accepting the governor's authority at the port of Veracruz, had declared himself the governor there. So, this Cuban governor sent a new force to Mexico to arrest him. Cortés learned of this force's arrival. Leaving 80 of his companions in the palace to guard the emperor, he marched off to confront them. Upon reaching the coast, he not only defeated the new force sent by the governor but also captured most of its soldiers. Then he bought the loyalty of these captured soldiers by tempting them with gold. Now, combining his existing soldiers with these new ones, he had a total of about 1,300 men, a decent-sized force. He was proud of his success, but when he triumphantly returned to Tenochtitlan, he was astonished to see that the situation had reversed, and with it, the Aztecs' perception had changed, and this visitor had turned from hero to villain. Hello friends, what had happened was that in Cortés's absence, his soldiers had started a riot during a local festival, in which thousands of Aztecs were slaughtered like carrots and radishes. After this massacre, the Spanish invaders hid inside the palace. But this massacre completely shattered the Aztecs' perception that these people might be some kind of gods or something. Now, angry citizens and Aztec soldiers laid siege to the palace. They wanted to kill them. During the siege, Cortés somehow managed to enter the palace and rejoin his men. He had the Aztec emperor brought to the palace roof and ordered him to tell his people to retreat and not attack. But the Aztecs did not listen to their emperor this time. In fact, they attacked the palace despite the emperor being on the roof. In this fight, Montezuma too, standing on the roof, was also killed, either by his own people or by the Spanish, but he was dead. After the emperor's death, Cortés and his companions decided to flee the city, because they couldn't hold off the thousands, lakhs of people trying to enter the palace for much longer. The people's God illusion was gone, and the emperor's authority was finished. On the night of June 30, 1520, Cortés and his companions took as much gold as they could carry and began to flee. They knew the Aztecs preferred not to fight at night, so there was usually no special guard at night. This was why the Spanish chose late night to escape. As the Spanish were fleeing, trying to cross the bridge on the causeway leading out of the city, an Aztec woman saw them and raised an alarm. Within moments, thousands of Aztec soldiers rushed towards them. Aztec soldiers showered arrows on the fugitives. Dozens of Spanish soldiers, laden with sacks of gold, fell into the lake and drowned under the weight of these sacks. That night is called La Noche Triste in Spanish history, which means Night of Sorrows. In this battle, approximately 400 to 600 Spanish soldiers were killed. The Aztecs also suffered heavy losses, but the Aztecs, who won this battle, could not turn this victory into complete success. What happened was that although the Aztecs had broken the back of the Spanish force at La Noche Triste, their leader Hernán Cortés managed to escape alive. Not only that, but he also defeated the Aztecs who had attacked him. Reaching Tlaxcala, he started preparing for battle again with the help of his allied local people. This time, he had new boats and cannons prepared for the attack on the Aztecs. He was busy with war preparations for the next year, i.e., 1521. But during this time, a bad thing happened to the Aztecs. A disease spread there. The germs of this disease were brought by the Spanish invaders themselves and had spread in the Aztec Empire because of them. The people of the New World, the Aztecs, were not immune to these germs because such diseases had never spread in this New World before. Therefore, their bodies had not evolved the natural ability to fight this disease. So, the poor Aztecs couldn't fight this germ, and within just 2 months, a large part of the city's population died from this disease. The city's people were still struggling with the onslaught of this disease when Cortés attacked the city once again in May 1521. His soldiers attacked the city from both land and water. First, boats were launched into the water. Compared to the Aztecs' small canoes, these were large boats, and on them were sharpshooters armed with guns. This naval force quickly crushed the Aztec flotilla in the lake. After this, Cortés's artillery began bombarding the city. This city was not a fort with strong walls. The result was that Spanish cannons reduced many buildings to rubble. After this, foot soldiers and cavalry, along with their allies, began advancing towards the city. The Aztecs tried to stop them from entering the city, but their arrows proved useless against the invaders' guns. Within moments, Spanish soldiers entered the city and started killing anyone who came before them with cannons and guns. But during this, the Aztecs bravely started defending every street and every house of their city. Every street and every house had become a battlefield. The Spanish forces had to fight hard to capture every building. But friends, people suffering from smallpox and disease could not sustain the war for long, and they were soon defeated. And then the Spanish began a massacre of the common citizens, those who had not even participated in the war. In one area of the city, 12,000 people were killed. In another area, in a single day, Spanish invaders killed 40,000 people in cold blood. The invaders had also cut off the city's water supply. Consequently, 50,000 Aztec people died drinking the salty water of Lake Texcoco. The remaining people in the city were also picked off and killed by these Spanish invaders. Now, wherever one looked in the city, there were corpses scattered. The Spanish soldiers were carrying crosses, and Christian priests were insisting that the dying people convert to Christianity. At the same time, these same invaders were throwing Aztec religious leaders alive in front of dogs and burning their books because, in their view, all this was heresy. The last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc, who had become ruler after Montezuma's death, was also captured. The Spanish lit fire under this last Aztec emperor's feet, forcing him to reveal where the remaining wealth might be hidden in the city. But this emperor did not speak until his death and was executed. Thus, friends, the Aztec Empire was ended forever, and the Spanish flag started flying over Mexico. But even after the conquest of the Aztec Empire in Mexico, one last wall, one last obstacle, remained in Spain's path, whose name was the Inca Empire. But the destruction of this empire proved even easier than that of the Aztecs. Music. The Aztec Empire ended in 1521. 10 years later, the Spanish conquistadors also attacked the Inca Empire. The Inca Empire was even larger than the Aztec Empire. With a population of over 1 crore 20 lakhs, its boundaries stretched from Ecuador to Chile. Its capital was Cusco in the region of Peru. But when the Spanish forces arrived here, the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, due to another war, was stationed with his 80,000 forces at the town of Cajamarca in Peru. The commander of the Spanish force was Francisco Pizarro, and he had only 180 soldiers with him. This force was much smaller than Hernán Cortés's force that had conquered the Aztec Empire. But Francisco Pizarro was far ahead of Cortés in cunning and deceit. He knew he couldn't fight the Inca army. So, he sent a message to the emperor that he wanted to invite him for a meeting. Atahualpa, like the Aztecs, was unaware of Spanish treachery. He came to Pizarro's invitation with 5,000 unarmed people and fell into the trap set by him. Pizarro had hidden his soldiers in the buildings along the route the emperor would take to enter his camp. When the Inca emperor's procession came, Pizarro sent a priest, Vicente, to the emperor. The priest told the emperor to convert to Christianity and accept the authority of the Spanish King Charles V. Atahualpa refused. Upon the emperor's refusal, the priest signaled to Pizarro that he was not willing to convert and submit, so Pizarro ordered a massacre. His men opened fire on the unarmed Native Americans, and foot soldiers and cavalry attacked them with swords. 5,000 people were brutally killed within an hour by just a handful of men. The emperor's litter was overturned, and he was captured alive. Then Pizarro forced the emperor to have so much gold brought from the Inca Empire in exchange for his release that a whole room was filled to the brim with gold. But after obtaining this gold, they still didn't release the emperor. They imposed a new condition. If Atahualpa converted to Christianity, he would be pardoned and released as a citizen of Spain. Atahualpa, to save his life, even accepted Christianity. But he still wasn't pardoned. In fact, paintings from that time exist showing that he was garroted to death. After the emperor's death, the Inca Empire met the same fate as the Aztec Empire. The region soon came under Spanish control. In America, these two empires, the Inca and the Aztec, were the only ones that had some ability to resist these invaders. But after their destruction, there was no longer any empire, kingdom, or sultanate left in the whole of America to stop the Europeans. During the next few decades, a large area of America from Mexico down to the tip of South America came under Spanish control, while Portugal had also established a foothold in Brazil by then. Then, in 1606, it happened that ships from England, which were also moving towards America in the form of an expedition, arrived in this new world. These people were going to establish a country in America that would become the world's sole superpower in the coming few centuries. The United States of America was about to be built. We will show you all this in the next part of History of America. The people who came to America searching for gold were shown a gold mine by a 10-year-old girl. It wasn't a real gold mine, but a gold mine of something far more valuable than gold. This 10-year-old girl is one of the most important characters in American history. She played the most crucial role in saving and then settling the first English settlement, Jamestown. Americans still consider this girl their ancestor. Who was this girl? How was Jamestown established and destroyed? How was the foundation of a superpower laid in Jamestown? I am Anchor Name, and in the History of America series on Deciphering History, we are showing you this story. Music. This is the coast of Virginia, a state on the east coast of the United States of America. Today, thousands of tourists wander on its white, golden sandy beaches. But 5 centuries ago, this coast was completely deserted. People did live here, but they stayed far from the coast. The Powhatan Empire of Native Americans was here. It was spread over miles in the form of dozens of settlements. On this very coast, at this place, which is now a peninsula surrounded by water, 104 Englishmen landed here in 1607 with large ships, weapons, and ammunition, and established their first colony. They named this colony after their king, James I, as Jamestown. And the river flowing alongside it came to be called the James River. The English built a small settlement in Jamestown consisting of small huts and constructed a strong wooden fence around it. So, they started calling it James Fort. In this fort, thatched roof huts were built, along with a church, a storehouse. This fort was built in a triangular shape, with a bastion at each corner and a cannon placed on each bastion. All this was done so that if the Spanish, who were the arch enemies of the English at that time, or the Native Americans, who the Europeans mistakenly called Indians, attacked, the people of Jamestown, despite their small numbers, could defend it. So, friends, Jamestown was established, but now a new problem arose. The land around Jamestown was swampy, absolutely unsuitable for growing crops. The result was that within some time, scarcity of food started in Jamestown, and many people began to die of hunger. Then, friends, a small 10-year-old girl came to their aid. This 10-year-old girl was the daughter of the Powhatan chief. Her real name is lost to history, but she became more famous by her nickname, Pocahontas, which meant, playful one, or, the mysterious one. How did this girl reach Jamestown? It happened that sometime after Jamestown was settled in 1607, a Native American group captured an Englishman named John Smith. He had wandered too far inside the Powhatan Empire's territory with 2 companions, where about 200 Powhatan warriors attacked him. Smith and his companions tried to resist but failed. His 2 companions were killed, and he was captured alive. The Native Americans took Smith to their chief. The chief tried his best to learn about Smith's origins. He understood some bits and pieces, but due to language issues, no proper conversation could happen. Whatever he understood or didn't, the chief ordered John Smith's execution. Smith's head was placed on a stone. The executioner was about to smash his skull with a club when suddenly a 10-year-old girl came running and placed her head over Smith's head. The atmosphere fell silent. The raised hand to kill Smith froze in place. The girl who performed this ritual to save Smith's life was named Pocahontas. And she was the princess of this empire, the daughter of Chief Powhatan. Due to his daughter's intervention, the chief spared Smith's life. Later, he showed extreme hospitality, making him a son-like figure and sending him back safely to Jamestown. After this incident, Pocahontas started visiting Jamestown frequently, bringing food and other supplies. With this help, the scarcity in Jamestown ended, and the people there got a new lease on life. This was the reason the people of Jamestown made John Smith their leader, because he had established very good relations with the Powhatan Empire through Princess Pocahontas. Over time, large-scale trade began between the natives and the English. The Powhatan people would provide food and other necessities to Jamestown, and in exchange, the English would give them weapons and other tools. This pleasant period of friendship and trade lasted for some time, but then, as someone said, the heart's life is short. This heart's life too was soon over. Music. The reason for the changing hearts and circumstances was that the demand for food from the English side kept increasing day by day, but the Powhatans didn't have that much surplus food. The problem was that this region of Virginia was suffering from the worst drought in centuries. Consequently, the Native Americans also didn't have much extra food to give to the people of Jamestown. So, friction started in their relations. To salvage relations, in 1608, John Smith went to meet the Powhatan chief. This meeting happened in a very pleasant atmosphere. But when everyone fell asleep at night, Smith suddenly woke up. Pocahontas was sitting at his head, crying. She told him, crying, "My father is going to kill you. If you can escape, run away." For the second time, the Powhatan princess had come to save Smith's life. But actually, it wasn't just Smith. A delicate flower was being crushed unknowingly between 2 emerging superpowers. So, Smith and his companions managed to escape and alerted Jamestown. Everyone's life was saved. But sometime later, Smith got injured and returned to England. Meanwhile, a new governor arrived from England to manage Jamestown with more soldiers and more people. During this time, relations between Jamestown and the Powhatans had become somewhat normal again, not like before, but normal. With the arrival of the new governor and new people, Jamestown's population increased. It also started happening that some people from Jamestown would go to the Native Americans and, impressed by their hospitality and customs, would start living with them. Remember, at that time, mostly men came from England and Europe to settle in Jamestown. The number of women was negligible. So, friends, the English began to exploit this growing male population illegally and fully. Firstly, they started attacking the Native Americans. Secondly, when settlers, tired of the food scarcity, would go to the Native Americans and start living with them, the people of Jamestown branded them as traitors. Fugitive Englishmen were searched for, and whoever was caught by Jamestown's people was burned alive or given some other painful death. Due to this cruelty, Princess Pocahontas and other tribespeople stopped coming to Jamestown altogether. But the result was adverse for Jamestown itself. In 1609, when the Virginia region was going through the worst drought, Jamestown was already facing a severe shortage of food. On top of this, 300 more people arrived from England at Jamestown. They had brought no food supplies with them. So, everyone looked at each other, thinking, when will the supply ships come? The time was winter, and that's why it was called the starving time. Winters in Virginia were very severe. Nothing was available to eat. Hunting was also impossible. Trade was out of the question. In such conditions, people in Jamestown started dying of hunger and thirst. Within a few weeks, 100 English people died. Those who were alive ate their pet dogs, cats, rats, even boiled the leather of their shoes to satisfy their hunger. When all this was exhausted, they did a painful and astonishing thing to stay alive. They dug up the corpses of their dead companions from graves and ate them. If blood started flowing from any weak, dying person, they would even drink that blood. Researchers have also created a facial model of a 14-year-old girl who died of starvation during that period, using her broken skull, which was later dug up and consumed by the settlers. This unfortunate girl was given the fictional name, Jane. That period is called the starving time in Jamestown's history. During that time, the Englishmen's desperation reached such a level that many people left Jamestown and went to the Native Americans, becoming part of their society. When the winter of 1609-10 began, there were 500 English people in Jamestown. But after the winter ended, only 60 people barely remained alive, clinging to life. When the weather improved a bit, they abandoned the fort and started walking towards the coast to go back to England. But on the coast, they saw some ships arriving from a distance. The ships were coming from England. On these ships were Jamestown's new governor, Lord de la Warr, and some settlers, along with plenty of food supplies. The arrival of these ships was nothing less than heavenly news for the starving Englishmen. Those who had lost their companions and all hopes had their hearts filled with new hope. They abandoned the idea of returning to England and stayed in the Jamestown fort. When the new governor, Lord de la Warr, set foot in Jamestown in 1610, it was a deserted settlement. The people here looked like skeletons. He provided food to the people living on their last breaths and also started preparations for war against the Powhatan Empire. First, he demanded that the Powhatans return the Englishmen who had left Jamestown during the famine. He wanted to punish them. But the Powhatans refused to hand over these fugitives. So, Lord de la Warr attacked them. With a forged document, these soldiers attacked a village belonging to one of Powhatan's allies and brutally killed anyone who fell into their hands. Then they captured the village's queen and her 2 innocent children, put them in a boat, and headed towards Jamestown. Along the way, the soldiers' mood changed. They threw the 2 children into the water and shot them in their throats. Then the queen was brought to Jamestown to be burned alive. Meanwhile, the commander of the military squad took pity on the queen. Instead of burning her alive, the commander killed her with a sword thrust. But the Powhatans were not the ones to sit silently after such attacks. They couldn't openly attack the fort because it was well defended by cannons, and the Powhatan people couldn't fight them directly. However, Englishmen who went outside Jamestown for farming or other work became easy prey for the Powhatans. They would be killed or abducted by Powhatan warriors. Besides these attacks, food supplies from the Powhatans to Jamestown had also stopped. So, the settlers started thinking of adopting a new strategy. And this time, they succeeded not on a military basis, but on a personal one. They abducted the Powhatan princess, the same Pocahontas, who had once given new life to Jamestown. Music. The English conspired with a local chieftain to capture Pocahontas. This insider, who knew her, brought this girl onto an English ship on some pretext, and there she became the English's prisoner. The year was 1613, and her age was around 15 to 16. Pocahontas's abduction is a very important chapter in American history because after this abduction, the Powhatan Empire had to bow before the English. The guerrilla war had to end, and food supplies to Jamestown were restored. The English didn't stop there. They forcibly converted Pocahontas to Christianity, gave her the Christian name, Rebecca, and even married her to an Englishman named John Rolfe. For this marriage, the English also obtained, according to custom, a large dowry from the girl's father, the Powhatan chief. Obviously, what choice did the chief have but to permit his daughter's marriage? But this girl gave the desperate English, who were unsuccessfully searching for gold, a clue to something more valuable than a gold mine. This secret, on which the life and death of the English would depend in the coming centuries, laid the foundation for the eventual independence of the United States of America. That secret was the cultivation of tobacco. Music. Before the English settled Jamestown, the Spanish, who were busy massacring people in South America, had learned the secrets and techniques of tobacco cultivation from Native Americans. After that, the Spanish started making big profits by exporting tobacco to Europe. But they never shared the secrets of tobacco cultivation with anyone else. This was why the Spanish invaders had a monopoly on the tobacco trade. For a century, they dominated it. But after 100 years, the situation changed. Similarly, an English farmer also got hold of tobacco seeds and brought them to Jamestown in 1612. Friends, this Englishman was none other than John Rolfe, the same man who was later forcibly married to Pocahontas. Before his marriage, John Rolfe had tried growing tobacco in Jamestown on a trial basis, but he wasn't successful in cultivating this tobacco commercially and to the level where he could prepare it. But after his marriage to Pocahontas, things changed. Pocahontas, being a Native American, understood the local climate and agriculture very well. With her efforts, soon, excellent tobacco crops started being produced in Jamestown. Jamestown now started sending this tobacco to England, which began to break Spain's monopoly on this trade. This was the time when the small settlement of Jamestown became a profitable colony, a sustainable colony for the first time. After this, there was a line of people coming from England. Many people from England and all over Europe started arriving in Jamestown and cultivating tobacco around it. Jamestown soon transformed from a small settlement and fort into a large town. Now, statistics will tell you that when Jamestown was established, the number of women here was negligible. Only 11 women had come to Jamestown with their husbands by 1608. And they still needed help. But when the number of men in the colony started increasing, the London Company introduced the world's first business concept. In 1609, 90 women were sent to Jamestown. These women married the local settlers, and thus, along with tobacco in Jamestown, families also began to form. Soon, families started growing, and children started being born. Families filled up, and along with them, tobacco fields also started expanding. Now, these growing fields needed labor. But the landlords of Jamestown weren't rich enough to hire laborers from England and pay them salaries. Besides, every Englishman coming to Virginia could own as much land as he wanted and expand his farm through his own labor. So, the problem of labor for these farms was solved by something that would become a new problem for America in the coming centuries. In fact, it is still America's fault line today. And the name of this thing was the arrival of slaves from Africa. In 1619, a Jamestown ship, with the help of a Dutch ship, looted a Portuguese ship. This Portuguese ship was used for the slave trade. Because of this, 50 African slaves, including women and children, were brought to Jamestown. The planters of Jamestown bought 20 of these African slaves. This marked the beginning of an era on the soil of the United States of America that would lead to a civil war 100 years later. Initially, the English had very little land in Jamestown and its surroundings, so often, officials even had small farms in their lawns and backyards where they grew tobacco. Then, as the English population grew, they felt the need for new lands and started taking over the lands of the Powhatan Empire. Besides, the only guarantee of peace between the English and the Native Americans was gone by that time. Because in 1616, 3 or 4 years before the period we are discussing, Pocahontas had gone to England with her husband John Rolfe and son. In England, she appeared at the court of King James, where she was treated as a royal guest. She was well received. In fact, her portraits were painted, showing her in European attire, and in interviews, her Christian name, Rebecca, was mentioned. This hospitality shows that in the eyes of the English rulers, Pocahontas was very important for the survival of Jamestown. But in 1617, this trump card slipped from England's hands. During the return voyage to Virginia, Pocahontas fell ill. She was taken to Gravesend in England, where she died and was buried there. Some Native Americans, telling her story, suggest that she didn't die from illness but was murdered. From there, this figure has become a legend in American pop culture today. Movies and cartoons have been made about her. In a 1995 animated film, she was even shown falling in love with Jamestown's Governor John Smith. With Pocahontas's death, the era of truce between the English and the Powhatan Empire ended. The Powhatans were now free from English blackmail. So, they also stood up to defend their motherland. They started targeting the new English settlements around Jamestown, which were not very well defended. In a 1622 attack like this, 347 Englishmen, including women and children, were killed. Among them was John Rolfe, who had returned to Virginia after his wife's death and lived there. But this massacre also did not stop the English population from settling there, and the English, defeating the Powhatans time and again, kept taking their lands. Besides the support of guns, the English also had the help of something else that was deadly for the Native Americans. In 1644, the Powhatans fought their last war for independence against the English. This decisive war killed 500 English settlers. But the Powhatans lost this war too, and their then chief was also killed. In 1646, the Powhatans surrendered, and the English, under the name of a treaty, enslaved them and took most of their lands. Thus, the English, starting from the small settlement of Jamestown, took control of a large part of Virginia within 39 years. The English, who once arrived in Virginia and crowned its chief, had now taken his throne, crown, and all his land. Today, a 1,500-acre piece of land remains as a memorial of this lost kingdom, which is called a reservation. Outside this reservation, the chief's descendants' face is carved on a mountain in the Black Hills. On this reservation, some people of the remaining lineage of the Powhatan Empire still live today. Similarly, there are reservations for other Native American tribes across America, whose lands were taken by these people. By 1699, Virginia had come under English control, but Jamestown itself was abandoned. Now, Jamestown has been rebuilt as a memorial at that very spot, which tourists from all over the world come to see. Here, models of the ships on which the settlers arrived before Jamestown are also erected. The person who gave life to Jamestown is buried both in Jamestown and in England. So, that was the story of Jamestown, the first English settlement in the United States of America, which laid the foundation for a superpower like America. But friends, when Jamestown was ascending the ladder of its success, the English were also establishing another colony. This colony was so successful that today, 1 in 10 Americans is descended from that colony. The movement for independence from Britain was also born from that colony. The story of that colony is, in fact, the story of the America you and I know today as the story of the 13 colonies. How did the slaves of Jamestown help this new colony? How were crops grown in sand? What is Thanksgiving Day? What is the history of Halloween? We will show you all this in the 7th and final episode of History of America Season 1. Approximately 500 years ago, an English ship anchored off the coast of Massachusetts. On board were about 100 people. They established a settlement named Plymouth, near the coast. Near where this settlement was established, there was a large tribe of Native Americans called the Wampanoag. One day, a Wampanoag man came to the English and said, "Hello," speaking in English. How did he know English? And what is that secret that Americans want to hide from their children? The American War of Independence started because of attacks on tea. I am Anchor Name, and in the final episode of History of America Season 1 on Deciphering History, we will show you exactly this. Hello friends. The second British colony in America, Plymouth, was established 700 kilometers away from the first colony, Jamestown, on the coast of Massachusetts. It was called Plymouth because the port from which the British settlers departed was named Plymouth. Most of the settlers of this colony belonged to a specific sect of Christianity, who were later called Pilgrims, meaning people who have set out on a sacred journey. These people did not have religious freedom in Britain under the king. So, in 1620, these pilgrims boarded the ship Mayflower from the British port of Plymouth and set out for America. After a 65-day journey, these people anchored off the coast of the American state of Massachusetts in December 1620. Among these religious travelers, there were also about 30 women and children. These people made an agreement among themselves while settling here. It was decided that the colony's people would make their own laws but remain loyal to the British Crown and also continue to follow their specific Christian sect. This agreement was a milestone in the lives of these settlers and their future generations. But initially, many troubles befell them all at once. The first trouble was that it was severely cold when they arrived. The huts they built from logs they cut were unsuccessful, and the icy winds would pierce through the wood and penetrate to their bones. The second major difficulty was that the land around Plymouth was sandy. It was impossible to grow anything, do any farming. Consequently, the settlers soon faced starvation. The third trouble struck them at the same time. Disease spread in the colony, and soon about 50 of the 100 people died. The condition of those who remained was worse than the dead. When all hopes failed, these religious people started hoping for a miracle. And look, a miracle did occur. The area around Plymouth was actually inhabited by a powerful tribe of Native Americans called the Wampanoag, whom the English later started calling Pocahontas. When these people saw the Plymouth colony in such a ruined state, they came to help them. The first person who came to meet the colony's people was a Wampanoag religious leader named Samoset. He had learned the language from English fishermen who came to the coast, so he knew English. And he was the one who said, "Hello," to the people of Plymouth. He then sent a Wampanoag named Squanto to help them. They had come to save the English, but their sympathy wasn't entirely free. The English had guns, ammunition, etc., which the Wampanoag needed to fight their enemies. So, the Wampanoag chief, Massasoit, made a deal with the English. For this reason, the English also became ready to fight the enemies of their soil in exchange for food. But before this war, they wanted to know how to grow crops in sand. The Native Americans' answer was fish fertilizer. Yes, Native Americans would bury fish in the sand and cover them with sand, and then grow crops. These fish acted as fertilizer for the crop. Now, following the advice of the Native Americans, the English started growing corn using fish fertilizer, and within a short time, beautiful cornfields started flourishing around the Plymouth colony. Fish fertilizer provided the miracle that the people of the Plymouth colony were desperately waiting for. For the English, this was a moment of thanks. But before giving thanks, the English had another task to perform. They had to eliminate Massasoit's enemies, which he promised them. On the night of August 14, 1621, a group of Wampanoag, along with the English, attacked a village of their enemies. The English rained bullets on the village. Within moments, dozens of Native Americans sleeping in the valleys were put to sleep forever. The English and Wampanoag, intoxicated with victory, returned to the Plymouth colony and celebrated the first harvest. The exact date of this celebration, friends, is unknown to anyone today, but this celebration was held sometime between September and November 1621. In this multi-day celebration, sports were played, and mock battles were also staged. And this is the celebration that was later named Thanksgiving. That is, the English were giving thanks for their successful harvest. In this celebration, there were only 50 Englishmen, but the number of Native Americans was larger. Their chief, Massasoit, participated in this feast with 90 of his people. These Native Americans also brought 5 cooked deer and wild fruits with them. The English feasted their guests with a large turkey and other dishes. It was a grand celebration. Obviously, this celebration was held on the ashes of other Native Americans whom they had come back from killing. And after this, Massasoit and the English also became temporary friends. But in the long term, this small friendship proved very costly for Massasoit and the other Native Americans living in this area, because after the success of the Plymouth colony, settlers from England came on a large scale and spread throughout this area, which is now called New England. These people spread out and settled. When the English foothold strengthened in different areas, they started working on the agenda of enslaving Native Americans. Then a war happened, after which there was no doubt that the English wanted to become the masters of this area, not friends of the Native Americans. Just 15 years after the founding of the Plymouth colony, in 1636, the English attacked another powerful tribe of Native Americans, the Pequot. This war was led by an English commander, John Mason. The mission surrounded a large Pequot village and set it on fire, in which about 20 Pequot women, children, and elders were trapped. All these people were burned alive in this fire. These people kept crying out for help, but no Englishman took pity on them. On the helplessness of these Native Americans, Commander John Mason had reportedly said that God was laughing at these people. They were enemies of God and his followers, and he had turned them into a burning furnace. This was God's judgment against the infidels, and God had filled this place with corpses. Then John Mason counted the corpses and said, "This is a just, fair judgment." Another English commander, Underhill, who was part of this massacre, justified the killing of women and children by saying that religious books declare that women and children must also die with their parents. Many other Englishmen of that era also justified this event. Several historians of the American Holocaust have cited the example of a New England religious leader, Increase Mather. This person wrote in his book about this event that within just 1 hour, 500 to 600 of these souls were wiped from the world they stood on. So, friends, through such exclusive justifications, the English kept trying to justify their crimes, and still do. In this genocide, which continued for about a month, the Pequot tribe was completely wiped out. All their settlements were burned down. The remaining people were tied with ropes and thrown into the sea, or sold as slaves in Bermuda. This tribe was annihilated. Their name was removed from the maps of New England, and new maps were redrawn. The name of a river flowing in Connecticut, which was called Pequot River, was changed to Thames River. On the banks of this river was a town named Pequot, whose name was changed to New London, which is still known by this name today. But the Pequot tribe is no more. So, friends, this was just the beginning. About 38 years after this event, another big war happened, and this time, the last breath of Native American independence in this area was extinguished. Hello friends, we showed you how the Wampanoag chief Massasoit had helped the Plymouth colony and also participated in their first Thanksgiving feast. But when he died in 1661, the people of Plymouth started fighting with his sons. Although his sons had even adopted English-like names. By 1675, friends, an astonishing custom had developed among Native Americans. They started giving themselves English names. After Massasoit's death in 1661, his elder son became chief, and he named himself Alexander. The English accused Alexander of a conspiracy, arrested him in 1662, and killed him in captivity. After him, his brother, whose name was Metacom, became chief. He took the English name Philip. Philip tried to maintain peace with the English but failed. The reason was that the English's attitude towards the Wampanoag had become very arrogant and insulting. They started giving orders to the Wampanoag. By then, the situation was such that the Wampanoag would buy weapons from the English and, in exchange, give them their land. But in 1671, the English forced Philip to sign a treaty under which the Wampanoag had to return even the firearms they had obtained by giving their lands. So, Philip's people lost their weapons, gave away their lands, and now completely depended on the mercy of the English. Philip couldn't bear this situation. Meanwhile, the English's actions kept increasing. In fact, they had started converting some Wampanoag people to Christianity and using them for espionage. In June 1675, when the body of one such spy was found, the Plymouth colony falsely accused Native Americans of the murder and hanged 3 people. At this point, Philip lost his patience. He wrapped a shroud around his head and marched out to fight a decisive war against the English. The war between Philip and the English is called King Philip's War, and this war lasted for a year, from 1675 to 1676. This was the last war of independence for the Native Americans in New England. Philip and the Wampanoag fought this war with their lives, and why wouldn't they? It was a matter of life and death for their future generations. But their position was very weak. The English had guns, and the Native Americans were empty-handed because they had already returned their guns under the treaty. Whatever few guns they could snatch from the English or obtain from smugglers and the French were insufficient. So, they had to fight this last war relying on weapons like bows and arrows. When the war started, soon the English gained the upper hand, and the Native Americans' extermination began. The English used their old strategy once again and started burning villages of Native Americans. Human settlements were turned into ashes and burned to the ground. The extent of English brutality can be gauged from the fact that an English religious leader and author, Increase Mather, very coldly described the incidents of burning villages. Remember that in this war, some Native Americans were also supporting the English. With their help, the English crushed the remaining power of the Wampanoag. After succeeding in the war, the English now wanted to find the chief, Philip, and make him a target of their revenge. His 9-year-old son and wife fell into English hands. Both were enslaved, but the chief, who had saved his life, could not escape for long. In August 1676, the English found out that Philip was hiding in a swamp in his ancestral village. So, the English and their allied Native Americans attacked that village. The last hero of the Native Americans' War of Independence in New England fell to their hands here too, but not alive. Philip fought with his last breath and was killed fighting. The irony is that the person who killed him was a fellow Wampanoag, but by then he had converted to Christianity and was supporting the English. But the English, instead of honoring their brave enemy, took revenge on his body. First, they dismembered him, then they burned the pieces. American writer David Silverman writes in his book, "This Land is Their Land," that the Wampanoag chief's severed hands were handed over to his killer, Alderman, who sent one hand away and kept the other as a souvenir. People visiting his house would pay to see the Wampanoag chief's severed hand. Philip's head was cut off and brought to Plymouth, placed on a pole outside the settlement, and displayed. The flesh from Philip's face and head was eaten by birds or rotted away within a few weeks. But the last native chief of New England's skull remained on display at the Pilgrims settlement for 20 to 25 years. In celebration of Philip's death, Plymouth and Massachusetts colonies declared August 17 as a day of celebration. This, friends, is the same person whose father had been an English ally and who had taught them how to grow corn and live. Today, his statue stands in the same Massachusetts where he once roamed. So, friends, this is the truth they want to hide today. Nevertheless, a tradition soon developed in America, and it continues to this day. But now this festival is celebrated on the fourth Thursday of November. In 1863, American President Abraham Lincoln declared a holiday on Thanksgiving Day, and it continues to this day. Whereas the Wampanoag who exist in America today observe this day as a national day of mourning. After Philip, the English completely dominated the Wampanoag. They had lost their land and now lived as subjects. Meanwhile, the English just kept expanding into other areas of America. The lifestyle of these settlers in America suited them so well that the average height of their children born here increased by 2 inches. On average, 8 children were being born in every family, and there was no one to stop this growing population. The descendants of the Plymouth colony settlers spread so much that today, 1 in 10 Americans is descended from this colony. This colony was a kind of seed. Within 100 years after this, 13 English colonies had sprung up over American cities. During this time, the French also occupied the northern parts of America and Canada, and where Florida is today, there was a Spanish colony. So, just as Europeans fought each other in Europe, here too, Britain, Spain, and France started fighting over cities and borders. This escalated into a major war in 1756. In this war, Native Americans also supported their preferred European power, wherever they saw some benefit. The British colonial force fighting this war was called the provincial troops. Among the officers fighting on the English side was a man named Music. In America, these European conflicts ended in 1765. Under the Treaty of Paris, France was driven out of Canada and America. French areas near Canada came under British control. French areas in America were divided between Britain and Spain. And Spain also ceded control of Florida to Britain. Some Native American areas that were still independent also came under British control. Thus, Britain, now beyond its 13 colonies, spread over